Welcome to creating WebSockets with JavaScript, C++, and HTML. What you do need to know for this tutorial is the basic native JavaScript, some basic understandings of WebSockets, maybe not with C++ itself or with JavaScript, but just a quick understanding of what it is and what it does on an abstract level. You should also know HTML5, and I think there's going to be a little bit of CSS, a little bit of CSS2, but we're using CSS3. So either one will not matter. You should have a web server of some kind to get around, to simulate a web server, but also get around the CSRF protections integrated in most every modern internet browser. And it also provides a nice little convenience of typing it in just localhost/tutorial.html. The first thing you want to do is create a new file and call it tutorial, or actually whatever you would like, tutorial.html. I already got that file here. You want to create the typical HTML5 boilerplate code that you might see. Actually, we don't need that. So pretty much we got the header, or the head of the HTML5. Next thing we want to do is the body. Let's see. And give pretty much every ID its own name. We are creating the input box now. Need a place to send the message. And the trigger. Okay, let's see what we have. So that's pretty much what we have. It's very unintuitive. We have no idea what's going on. Doesn't look pretty, but we're not here for pretty. The next thing we want to do is actually make it look pretty. So that will show us our messaging box. So yeah, we got our messaging box. It's starting to come together already. A little bit of space for our conversation. All right, so it's almost there. It's getting there. Let's bring that send message down. Awesome. Do believe we're missing something. All right, so here we go. Basically have our conversation, the message history, place to type in the message, and the trigger, send message. So let's make this functional. First thing you want to do is create a new console application. All right. When you first create an application, you want to run it to make sure that the template was properly built by Qt Creator, and it looks like it was because it did run properly. The next thing we want to do is create a class, and we will call this the service class. Okay, when you make your class, you want to make sure to include it so you can run it. No point in creating something if you can't run it right. WebSockets service. Let's see, Qt needs to know what libraries it needs to include, which is the WebSockets, and this will tell the compiler where the directory of the WebSockets library is at. And now we want to include that library. And it's the server, so we're not including WebSocket. We're including WebSocket server. The first thing we want to do is make a begin. I like to do a begin code because it works better than writing in the constructor as a begin. And that is just a memory management preference. I find that code crashes less if you make a begin rather than writing it in the constructor here. So let's see, the first thing we want to do with the begin is let's run it. WebSocket service begin, that will run the code. And now we want to make it do something. So we will go to the header file of service and make a QWebSocket server. Whoops. We'll just call it socket. So we go over here and make our socket, initialize our socket. Oops. QWebSocket server, and we're going to do non-secure mode because we want to know the basics and not security. Perhaps I'll make a educational video on how to do that. So far we've just created a structure in memory. We haven't actually touched the network card, so we want to start listening and touch the network card. Looks like that's not loading for some reason. Let's just run this. I feel like something isn't working right. Expected type specifier. Oh, you know what I did? I put service instead of server. There we go. And we're just going to allow access, and on both of them, private and public, so it does look like it's working. The next thing we want to do is create a signal slot connection, and when you see the QObject connect, always, it has nothing to do with networks. QObject connect can also work with buttons. It basically is a trigger mechanism for QObjects. It has nothing to do with the network itself. However, you can get triggers from a network card, and that's basically what we're doing. The reason I mention that is a lot of people believe that QObject Connect has to have a network connection, and that is just not true. There's a lot of preconceptions about that. So basically, we're saying we want when a new client creates a new connection, this triggers this signal, new connection. And we're going to put up an action that goes to this, which that's what this is, service. So anytime you see this, it's talking about itself. Whatever's inside this, it's talking about itself class. So basically there is no available function to trigger to this reaction, the new connection reaction. So we want to create a function that will trigger. We will call that new connection. And then you put new connection here. And since it's a slot, it uses the signal slot, trigger mechanism, new connection. Alright, so we have a working code. Yep, we do have working code. The next thing we want to do is to test to see if a connection, or I'm sorry, if a client has created a connection with us. So we're going to use qdebug to ensure that we have built the code thus right so far. I find testing your code with qdebug and constant runs and just constant poking at your code to make sure it works as you move forward saves a lot more time than it would seem if you didn't do that. Because if you write a bunch of code and it doesn't work, then you're going to have to backtrack to a point where you knew that it did work. And sometimes you've just gone too far and you'd have to start all over. So we're going to go ahead and run this. And this is totally separate than your web server. The web server has no idea what is going on. All this web server does is deliver our HTML and JavaScript files for us. So we're going to go ahead and go over here and F5. And if you remember right, we didn't include a JavaScript file. So what we want to do is include a JavaScript file. And let's see, we will put that dynamic changes with JavaScript comment. All right. So the next thing we want to do is create that JavaScript file. File new, empty file, tutorial.js. Let's see. Whoops. Tutorial.js. Okay. So now when we go to our tutorial.js, we want to make sure that we can, it's basically loading into our HTML file. We're going to test that with console log, JavaScript loaded and running. So I'm going to go over here, inspect element. Chrome has the same thing. I'm currently using Firefox. Go over to your console, and then you're going to hit the enter key. Hitting refresh sometimes doesn't always refresh. And you'll see that nothing popped up, and that is because we forgot to do an onload. So you go to body, onload. I don't know if you can do a lowercase L. I've always done uppercase. I believe that is the standard. And then HTML page loaded, semicolon, with the 2 parentheses in front, and then this time it should pop up. So and then we have JavaScript loaded and running. So now that we know that that works, let's go ahead and start making our sockets. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Socket connection to service, which is a global, considered a global variable. I can't really say that there is such a thing as globals in JavaScript, but that's just how I handle it. Runs when page loads. Okay, so now we can do socket connection to service equals new web socket. Next thing you want to do is type in the local address, WebSocket, ws, :// localhost, and we're going to do 80. I don't know if we did, yeah, we're doing 8080 because we did the listen there as 8080, so. The next thing you want to do is socket connection to service on open equals function event. And we will test to make sure that we're connecting. Connected to service. So let's go back to this and refresh our page, and it says connected to service, and we should get a connected new connection. Okay, and as you can see, closing that automatically shows a convenient little error there, which is intended because the connection was lost. So let's continue in the next chapter, and we will start sending messages.